Joining us now in New York, Liz Peek. You can follow Liz at Liz Peek. She got the best, easiest Twitter handle on earth. You can also read Liz Peek in the Financial Times, and she had a column yesterday, very interesting, talking about deportations. Good to have you with us, Liz.
Good morning, and I'm going to avoid talking about all those nasty remarks made earlier. You were right. Donald Trump is doing better than I thought. How's that?
That's good. Thank you. I appreciate the acknowledgement of my sheer predictability, genius, and brilliance. But thank you.
You're welcome.
Only get better when people like yourself adorn our listeners with your insight and presence. So thank you.
Happy to join you.
Okay, Liz. Now, yesterday, interesting column you have in the Fiscal Times, and it starts out, "Is Hillary Clinton dishonest as so many Americans think?" And you go on to talk about the potential of what might happen this summer with all of these illegals coming in, these children coming in to beat a potential Trump presidency, to get in before they put up the wall, and that it could cause chaos and then elect Trump. Can you elaborate?
Well, yeah, what we have is another surge of Central American illegals coming across the border. The number apprehended in the last 6 months is up over 100% from last year. And if you remember, in 2014, there was this horrifying spectacle of tens of thousands of people simply walking across the Rio Grande and into the United States while our border guards looked on completely helplessly. And I think for a lot of Americans who had long believed what the administration had told them, that is, that our borders were closed, that we were secure, people were absolutely horrified. And that is one of the main reasons, that summer surge, that basically Republicans voted out Democrats out of the Senate and took over the Senate. There were a number of other things that became sort of that election became a referendum on the Obama White House, but this was clearly one of the reasons that people were so wrought up. And polling showed that swarm of people amassing at the southern border also really hardened Americans' attitudes towards immigration, really for the first time. The 2014 problem arose because of the 2012 DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, that Obama had passed in order to get reelected. He basically wanted Latino voters who were very frustrated that he hadn't passed immigration control to get back on board. So what's happening this year? All of a sudden, we're approaching, obviously, another election. Obama begins to ramp up deportations of people. They've had raids already in January and threw out 121 families, naturally provoking outrage on the left, outrage amongst immigrant supporters and Latino voters, and also Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. But here's the thing. Hillary Clinton knows full well, and Obama knows, that the deportations are the only way to stem this flood of refugees that are coming to the United States. And there are reasons why the numbers have picked up again, and it has to do with a judge basically saying the Obama administration can no longer legally hold people in detention while their asylum bid is being heard by a judge. So we have tens of thousands of people who were basically released from detention.
Right.
And also tens of thousands more whose asylum has been denied. And they are basically at loose in the country. So the thinking is that just as in 2012, word went out in Central America, come on up, the doors are open, we're very willing to accept you, the same thing has happened again. And what could be better for Donald Trump than another reenactment of that horrifying scene in 2014 when we had no control of our borders, and it could well happen again.
Well, Liz, I think you're right. I think you're spot on here. I think that would seal the election for Trump, especially if this unfolded over the summer, and it could even be worse than it was when this happened in the previous cycle. And Liz, the other thing with this, and I'm so glad you mentioned it, so many of these people have come in and applied for asylum, and it's been denied, right? Yeah. It's just been denied because to get asylum, there has to be political persecution. They just apply for it. It's denied. but then they're gone. You can't find them. They're somewhere in the
That's
United
right.
States, and then they're getting Obamacare and everything else. Now, you've also got, as you mentioned, you've got the refugees or the illegals that come over the border illegally, and they're applying for asylum. Well, they're supposed to be detained until such time as the asylum is granted or denied, and if it's denied, they're then thrown out. Well, they're not detained. They're just loose.
Exactly.
So everybody's loose. So you just
Yeah.
come in and say asylum, and then you end up somewhere, any place, and it's going to be a chaotic scene at the border. Liz Peek, no question about it.
It's a mess. And again, I think it's very interesting. If you parse Hillary's words, she's saying, oh, these deportations are wrong. They don't reflect who we are as a country. She doesn't say stop them. She doesn't say this is the most horrifying thing ever, because she gets full well that her best interest is rounding up these people, sending them back to South America, and believe me, it's like instantaneously people know in Central America what's happening here. They know they won't, the minute the DACA is passed, people started putting their kids on trains to go north. The other thing, weirdly, that's happened is that we have a huge number of Cubans coming through Central America to get to our border because they're worried that open relations now with Cuba is going to end the favored access that Cubans have always had. So, Obama does these things, enacts, these executive orders, these one-man band fiats about various issues, and he never considers the consequences. Or even if he does, he decides that the immediate political gratification is just too compelling and goes ahead anyway. But this is a real problem for Hillary Clinton. She's got a number of problems right now. But on this one, she's kind of cooked because, she's damned if she does, damned if she doesn't. She needs Latino voters. That Obama coalition depended very heavily on a big Latino turnout,
Right.
And young people and blacks. And she's got the blacks, no doubt about it, in her corner. Young people, clearly not. They're with Bernie Sanders and increasingly look like they might be disaffected by the rivalry between those two campaigns. She needs Latinos, so she's in a very tough place.
Oh, she really is. But I also think you're right that if you look at her wording, it's not she's opposed to it. It's that she doesn't think it's the right thing to do. So it's kind of the same, but it's not. But look, I think the Democrats here are in a very difficult position because I think you're right, Liz. The country is turning away from them. I was going over an earlier segment today before you got on. One of our senators here, Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia, a likely vice presidential candidate when Clinton's the nominee. We think it's going to be Clinton. Kaine, he's going full frontal now on saying, look, we need to take in 10,000 Syrian refugees. We've only taken in 1,800. Obama promised 10,000. I want the other 8,200 in. And that's his lead now. That's what he's working on. And I just think they're out of touch because an average person right now in my listening area that is either unemployed or underemployed or working 100 hours a week trying to make ends meet doesn't care about taking in another 8,800 Syrian refugees at $65,000 each when they're trying to make ends meet. We can't get veterans care. 20,000 people are homeless in Los Angeles living under bridges. Our schools are overrun. We got a record number of people on food stamps. And now
I totally agree. Yeah.
And now we're worried about 8,800 Syrian refugees that we can't vet them anyway. It doesn't make any sense. I don't think these Democrats understand the mood right now of the nation, and I think that's why they're going to lose.
Well, I think you're totally right, and you were and are totally right that Donald Trump has really had an uncanny ability to sort of ferret out issues that resonate. And it's interesting to me that Kaine is pushing this so hard because polling is pretty clear that people don't want to discriminate against Muslims. They also don't want Syrian refugees in the country. And not on humanitarian grounds, obviously, they're compassionate, but they're worried about the security threat. The feeling is, well, wait a minute, why do we need to take this on voluntarily when we've seen in Europe, after all, and admittedly at a much bigger scale, millions of people heading to Europe, amongst which are hidden any number of jihadists, men and women. Why would we want to take that risk? And I think, you can kind of charge Obama's administration with, look, if we didn't care enough about the Syrian people, of whom now 450,000 have been killed, to intervene in Syria or to create a no-fly zone or a safety zone there, why are we doing this? I mean, the two don't really compute.
They really don't, especially when you look at neighboring Middle Eastern countries, allies of the United States, that are taking in zero. Kuwait, zero.
Yeah.
The Saudis, zero. Arab Emirates, zero. Dubai, zero. So we're paying for their security. They're not taking them in. Our young men and women died to liberate Kuwait. They're not taking them in. We're paying for them. It's maddening. And now you've got the future potential vice presidential candidate making a big issue about, we were promised 10,000. We only got 1,800. I don't think they really understand. I think they're in a bubble up there, and they don't really understand the plight of regular working people that just look at this and say to themselves, what about me? What about
that is the line. Someone was asking me the other day. Obviously, people have been talking about it nonstop. Who are the people who are really lining up behind Trump? And I was trying to explain that there's a pretty big majority of the country that feels that most of the government programs and attention over the last 7 years have been directed at everybody but them. And I think you're right. I think, who's the constituency for ramping up importing Syrian refugees? Who really care? For whom is that the biggest issue out there? I honestly can't think of very many people who would put that sort of front of the line. As you say, especially when we have so many other issues confronting everyday Americans. I'd really, even this TSA snafu, I know this is not life or death, but it is inexcusable. Let us just say it is inexcusable that any American misses a flight because the TSA can't get their job done. Truly, right? I mean,
yes.
People should be marching in the streets on this. I would be beyond furious if I and my family had to spend the night at O'Hare Airport because the TSA lines were 2.5 hours long. Give me a break. That is a fundamental collapse of government services. And, John, it's happening on all kinds of fronts. Here in New York, our streets are almost impassable. People need to demand more of their governments. And the passivity of Americans begins to frighten me, that they put up with this TSA baloney. They put up with streets that aren't working, et cetera. They put up with Obamacare, which is a truly terrible program, and for which, costs are going up at an accelerating pace. When are we going to, maybe they aren't willing to put up with it, and maybe that is the clamor for Donald Trump. I think partly that is true.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's why he's going to win. And you look at Obamacare, you haven't even seen, right, Liz? You're an economist. You understand this. We haven't even seen what's going to go down with this in the near future because of insurance companies that are, pulling out of it because they're losing money and they're afraid they might not get the bailout. And I want everybody to know, in Obamacare, if insurance companies lose money based on this, the taxpayers bail them out. So the average American's insurance cost went way up. It's going to continue to go up. And if the insurance companies lose over a certain amount of money, then we bail them out. So the whole thing is it's a corrupt enterprise, but they're pulling out of it. Premiums are going to go up higher. The whole thing is a disaster. And again, who is this aimed at? It was not aimed at working class Americans. That's why the elites up there, they're in a bubble. They have no idea that there is an uprising. Now, you're seeing it with Bernie Sanders. You saw it in Nevada. The solutions are different, but the identified problems are the same. And
I agree.
It's the same thing.
Two sides of the same coin,
right?
And it's interesting to me that all the media has focused on the rift in the GOP, how the Republican Party is shattered, won't be able to reconstitute itself for a decade, et cetera, et cetera. And now, finally, people are beginning to look at the Democrats and say, well, wait a minute, there seems to be a problem on the left as well, which involves throwing of chairs. Maybe we need to start paying attention. So today, I start every day reading the New York Times cover to cover because I consider it my duty, my patriotic duty. And page one, column entitled Sanders Willing to Harm Clinton in Home Stretch. In other words, trying to convince Sanders that his persistence and endurance is basically aimed at hurting Hillary Clinton, which, the media is piling on to get Sanders to, basically put down his gloves and say, okay, fight over. But he won't do it because he doesn't believe in Hillary Clinton. He doesn't believe that she's engaged in the topics that he wants pursued. And by the way, my piece is exactly about that. She doesn't care about Latinos. She just wants them to vote for her.
Exactly. No more than she cares about 28-year-old African-American males that are at an unemployment rate of 50%. She doesn't care about them either. She doesn't care about anybody but herself. And
the sad thing is I don't think the African-American community cares about them because look at the turnout for Hillary Clinton amongst black voters. It is persistently high. No one is challenging her. I went on a liberal talk show the other night, and mostly the call-ins were black voters. And you could have, for example, we just started talking about Bill Clinton's misdeeds in the past and Monica Lewinsky, and one woman said, well, you don't know that happened. And I said, well, he has said it happened, and she said it happened. And he said, well, you weren't there, so it didn't happen. I was like, okay, I wasn't at the American Revolution either, but I think that happened. But it's, it doesn't matter. People will not hear a word against their favorite person, Hillary Clinton. It's kind of amazing to me.
Well, it's lines at TSA, missing airplanes, like you say, streets are impassable now in New York. And you're right, the last time I was up there for a week for the New York primary. I think you came on my show, and the city has gone down since Giuliani.
It's a mess, isn't it?
Since, what's his name was there? Bloomberg. I mean, it's really gone down. And, I grew up there, so I saw it during David Dinkins, and I saw it during a Beam, and I saw it during Giuliani. Liz, I got to take off. Thank you so much. You're always fabulous to have on. Follow Liz on Twitter as @LizPeak, read her in the Fiscal Times or her website, lizpeak.com. I'll be right back.